And welcome to Weekday Warriors of Wrestling for, well, it's being recorded on Saturday, May 8th, 2021. This will probably be online on Sunday, May 9th, Mother's Day 2021, as we start to hopefully come out of the pandemic. Restrictions are being lifted. Hopefully wrestling will be in front of people. We're all anxious to get out there as vaccinated folks and do this. But I'm Eric Clancy. I'm joined by Patrick Kelly. We're going to be talking blood and guts. We have our first Q&A segment today. You guys sent your questions to our email address, which Patrick will remind you because I never remember what it actually is. We're going to do that. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Just kind of chilling and relaxing here. It's a nice, good old day to talk about wrestling.
It is. We had, let's get into blood and guts. Let's get into the big show from this week. We're going to talk about it. There was a lot of controversy from the ending. A lot of people didn't like it. Some people did like it. We're going to talk about how we felt here. Let's go into the main event. Patrick, before I say what I want to say, what was your thoughts on the main event?
The overall match I thought was very good. I am a fan of the old War Games style of matches. And I thought this match, better than the NXT ones, better lived up to the legacy of like the old War Games matches. My favorite one from the past being the one from Wrestle War 92, Sting's Army versus the Dangerous Alliance. And this one felt very much in line with that style of War Games match. It was wild. It was crazy. Everybody had a role to play. It was a giant violent brawl. There was lots of blood and guts and everything. It was, I thought the entire product overall was very well done and very well presented. It's just, I guess the only major knock that anybody would have with it would be the closing spot, which, you know, given my preferences, if we had to compare this to the Matt Hardy-Sammy Guevara match from a few months ago, I'd rather have it be too safe than have it be too dangerous. So, given my preference, I'd rather have it be too safe than not that at all. But the way it was shot and everything, it looked very clear that Jericho landed in a crash pad. And it wasn't very convincing that he had just been, killed, basically, which is what they were going for.
Yeah, so there's a few things about this. I kind of want to point out the fact that I think there's been a false choice being given to people when they talk about this. When people criticize this finish, I've heard people say, did you want Jericho to die? And I don't think the choice is Jericho to die or to have a fake-ass looking spot. I think there's a middle ground, and I think WWE does it really well, and it's to have a super cool, safe-looking spot that looks dangerous as hell. And I think with a better camera angle, with a better, shot, they could have done that. And they didn't. And, I'm an AEW fan. I'm not a huge WWE fan. So before people say like, oh, you're a WWE bootlicker or whatever, I'm not. Like our show covers AEW 85-90% of the time.
And if you've listened to our show at all, we are definitely not WWE bootleggers.
Yeah. But like sometimes when you criticize AEW, that can be the reaction. And I don't think it's fair because I think anything should be criticized. Otherwise, we're just like the WWE fans who just say, oh, this is good, this is fine, whatever. So the fact of the matter is AEW has dropped the ball in a lot of cases on production, whether it was Revolution with the finish, whether it was this tonight. There's been a few times where the camera crew has missed things or the production hasn't been as great as it could have been. And
we talked about it last week with the Cody spot and the bus.
Yeah. You saw Cody hanging out in the bus and and I don't think that was as dangerous, and I'm not dangerous, but as damaging as this was. But it's not great, and it's indicative of a larger problem with production. You can have Jericho go through a crash pad and have it look cool, but you need to figure that out. And this clearly wasn't figured out because I didn't think it did a great job. Now, there are people that criticize the actual finish of the match. Now, I disagree with that. I like the finish of the match. I like threatening to throw Jericho off in the inner circle, caring about him and like actually being friends and saying, no, we'll give up. It's not that important. And then MJF doing it anyway. It's very reminiscent of the 97 War Games.
I was going to make that reference. Yeah.
Versus Four Horsemen, where Hennig threatened to slam the cage door on Flair's head. They give up, and then he does it anyway. So I have no issue with that. But the actual spot after did not look as cool as it could have. I thought there could have been improvement there, and I think overall the takeaway that we've had for the past 3 months with AEW is they need to improve their production. Like, this would never happen with WWE. AEW has the right mindset and the right way to tell stories, but as far as a lot of the execution, when it comes to the bigger set pieces, sometimes it falls flat. And for people who are like, oh well, they got 1 million viewers and they were 4.42 number one on the night. That's great. That's all great. But you have to knock that shit out of the park when all those people are watching. Like you and I talked about it. When people saw Hogan and Andre, they were like, yeah, that's really good. And that finish to the main event with Hogan and Andre and the Hebner finish, that's good stuff. And that made people come back. Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin with Mike Tyson, that was good shit. That made people tune back in. And there was an appreciating value on those returns. If you keep having these big things that Revolution did 150,000 pay-per-view buys, or this one did 1 million people in a 0.42, and you finish off with a fart, people aren't going to tune back in. So you do need to be careful about that. We've seen this many times because AEW has swung and missed many times with getting the mainstream audience. It's why in 2009 WWE had 7 million celebrities on their programming and their ratings stayed exactly the same or they dropped. It's because it was fucking ridiculous and the whole celebrity host thing made it look like a joke. AEW has had Shaq on, and then they've had Shaq disappear, and then they've had Revolution sell something and the ending sucked and stuff. When you bring these guys on, you have to make a big impact with it. That's you can't just oh, they're going to see my product and think it's great. Your product needs to be fucking airtight. When WWE brought in celebrities in 1995, like Lawrence Taylor, they may have the WrestleMania 11 wasn't a huge success, but people checked it out and they didn't stick around because it wasn't worth sticking around. When they brought in Mike Tyson in 1998, the product was way better and they had a lot more stars ready. People stuck around. AEW needs to make sure they have that shit buttoned up. And when they do these big mainstream angles, they need to make sure that everything is not getting too cute and they're not fucking around. And I thought Blood and Guts was a really good match. I didn't think it was great. I thought it was a really good match. And I thought it had a good finish, and I thought it had a bad final spot. That said, and it's funny, Patrick, that you say you like the tradition of the old War Games matches. I was watching this, and it's also interesting you say you like this better than the NXT matches, because I think Undisputed Era Insanity was very good. I think the three-way with... I think it was Authors of Pain and Roderick Strong, Undisputed Era, and who was the third team? Was it Sanity?
I forget, to be honest.
Yeah, I know they all do kind of run together, but
yeah.
I was watching this and I'm I've never been this guy. I've always been whenever Vince is we need to get rid of the Survivor Series elimination matches. People don't watch it for that, and I'm always been that's ridiculous. Nobody doesn't watch for that, but. So I'm kind of going against type here, but I think the War Games format is dated.
I've said this before when I was doing YouTube videos. I made this comment. I love the old War Games matches, but it's a very hard match to do annually. The formatting of it, it should be this type of match that you only use when you need it, when you have a big team versus team set up and you want to see the two teams fight. That should be the time to use it. But when you try to force it onto a pay-per-view like Fall Brawl, like WCW did back in the day, it just kind of came off as forced, and there was diminishing returns as it kept going. And Yeah, so I don't know if it's dated, but I do feel that it's easy to get that format overexposed if you do it annually or you do it when the situation doesn't call for it.
So here's why I think it's dated, and here's what I think like challenges it. So the match doesn't begin until the final participant comes in. Now, you could, so to me that's like, okay, nothing's going to really happen until you get to that final point. So you can make this the case that like, oh, the Royal Rumble, like you have to eliminate everybody. So you have to wait until the 30 competitors. But within that time period, people are getting eliminated, things are happening. Like there is consequence to that. In War Games and Blood and Guts, to me, it's like they're just punching each other until they get to that final person coming in. And there's lack of stakes for those moments. I also think in modern context, in pro wrestling, in MMA it'd be fine or whatever, but in pro wrestling, I think the submission only hurts it. My idea, and I say this is my idea, I talked about this with a colleague at work the other day. The idea would be to have almost a Survivor Series War Games hybrid, whereas the match cannot end until all participants are in the ring. However, eliminations can occur throughout the match. So if you had Proud and Powerful in there and Sean Spears and they eliminated him, he'd be out. So you could get an advantage in the match, and then by the time the match starts, you can have X amount of people versus X amount of people. I think that would be interesting, and it would give more credence and weight to the match. And I also think you would have like falls that would matter and count in the meantime. So I think the fact that no falls can happen does hurt the format of the match.
Sure, and one thing that the NXT matches, and this one as well, I saw some people say the complaint against Blood and Guts as well, is that the match is too long. And I think maybe that's something that can help with that, where you're right. I mean, no falls happen until everybody's entered. So, it could it's very easy to screw that match up because it can just settle into just pointless action where nothing of consequence happens. And that, there are ways to get creative. I thought this match did a very good job of keeping me interested before everybody got in there. So, but I've seen a lot of War Games matches where it's kind of a drag until everybody's in there. TNA, whenever they do Lethal Lockdown, I felt like a lot of those matches kind of fell short for that reason.
I think the complaint that it's too long, I think is valid, and I think the idea that you've got like these commercial breaks. I really feel like these breaks they either need to shorten it a little bit or they need to do an hour sponsored by State Farm with no commercials, because they missed a lot of key stuff, like Wardlow coming in and taking down the Inner Circle. I thought they missed that. Like there was a lot of stuff. I heard the
ring mat up.
Yeah. I thought the Fight TV version, I'm sorry, I didn't think that, but like from what I've heard, the Fight TV version is much better. So yeah, that's something they need to work out. And once again, that's a production thing. That's a thing that for all the shit we give WWE for how, predictable their shows are, of how it doesn't make any sense, and these invisible cameras and these
go to commercial when somebody gets knocked out of the ring.
Yeah, these bad talking points. For all those things we say about them, WWE's production has always been top notch. And you look at AEW and they are not WWE production, and I would like to see them become that, because I with AEW's kind of mission statement and AEW's way of telling stories, I think is fantastic. And I think if you combine that with a great production, then they're unbeatable. So I would like to see how that goes. But yeah, I thought it was a good show. I didn't think it was great. I thought the earlier stuff in the show was pretty good. But yeah, Blood and Guts to me was a mixed bag in the same way that Revolution was. I really liked the match, just like I did at Revolution. But when you have a finish like that, it can suck the air out of the room.
And again, it's just something. The thing that happened at Revolution with the barbed wire match, that was an unfortunate mishap that kind of caught everybody off guard. This is something I feel could have been fixed with if they were doing a walkthrough earlier in the day. It's like, hey, let's do it from this camera angle so people don't see the crash pad, or it doesn't look as bad. Or maybe don't show Jericho Land and just kind of leave it up to people's imagination, do like an old school movie thing with it. Those are ways that they could have done it. To me, there was like kind of a simple solution to get around it that nobody caught for whatever reason.
Yeah, and there was editing's important. I don't just mean like video editing. I mean editing yourself and knowing where and how to do things. And there was a lot of things they did well, like MJF's like blood covered face on the top of the cage was awesome. So yeah, I thought it was I liked it, but I would have liked it more if that finish had been changed.
I think a lot of people felt the same way.
Yeah. What else happened this week that
on AEW?
No, just in general in wrestling. I mean, more AEW we can talk about.
I can't think of any like major headlines or anything that happened with WWE.
Yeah. Oh, no. There was a major thing that happened, Patrick.
Oh, really? What was that?
On Sunday or Saturday or Monday, we got, actually, I think it was Wednesday. Yeah, I think it was Wednesday. We got news that Daniel Bryan's contract had expired on Friday or Saturday.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I heard it was coming up soon, and then it kind of broke. It's like, no, it's already expired. I'm like, oh, shit. So that will be interesting to see what Daniel Bryan ultimately decides to do. And by the way, now we know why he didn't win the title at WrestleMania, for those of you that were complaining about the ending to that show.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I agree that the ending was probably what it should have been, so I think it's fine. Now, the speculation will begin, and we'll see what he decides. I mean, we've heard we've heard the reports. They say that AEW wrestlers think he's going to re-sign with WWE, and he may very well. Bree has ties with them. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's not going to be about money, because we know Daniel Bryan has it, and we know he doesn't really care about it. We know he's very passionate about pro wrestling. He's passionate about, wrestling the people he wants to wrestle and doing the things he wants to do. He's talked about this, and after his contract expires, I think it expired, it's more of a interesting talking point, but he talked about like wanting to open up and work with other promotions and stuff. And apparently the news now in the past like 2 months or 1 month is that WWE may have a working relationship with MLW, because they don't want to be seen as stodgy and not wanting to work with people, because as we've seen, the modern pro wrestling company works with other companies, which is like very interesting, because from like 1992 to like now, or not now, but since like ROH had their major deal with New Japan and such, and CML had their deal with them, companies didn't work together. And now we've gotten into more of a cooperative type, hey, everybody can succeed type of thing, which I think is true. I think a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think the idea that you have to compete with people, as opposed to, I know these aren't the most popular bands right now, but like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin didn't need to compete with each other. They were both bands that existed and had their fan bases, and they both did really well and made a lot of money. And Kiss and there's this idea that like, oh, there's only room for enough in pro wrestling. Well, it's not necessarily true. I mean, two companies were competing against each other on the same night, and they set record ratings and had record profits and all sorts of things. And so the idea that all these companies can't be successful, I think, is silly. All it does is broaden the audience for pro wrestling. And the more types of pro wrestling you have, the more different people will watch pro wrestling. And I think that's important, because we as pro wrestling fans, like you listening to this, me, Patrick, everyone, need to understand that like the more of us there are, the better it is, because then there's more pro wrestling on TV, there's more pro wrestling on pay-per-view, there's more pro wrestling on streaming, there's more choices for you. And then companies that buy the rights or pay for advertising understand that, hey, this is a force and this is a thing we need to pay attention to. We need to sponsor and get behind this. So I think it's a very modern attitude, and I think it's one that I mean, even like 2 or 3 years ago, I can't imagine WWE working with these companies. I mean, I guess to a degree they worked with Progress and Evolve and stuff, but it's very different from how it used to be.
Oh yeah. Well, it's kind of. I guess that's one kind of aspect of the territory era that's kind of back now, where you do have all these companies kind of shaking hands and working together a little bit and making it better for all of us. So, if they're going to be doing something with MLW, I say that's great.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. And we Patrick, I don't know if you saw this, but El Jefe is back on MLW.
My boy. Yeah, I heard I haven't watched MLW since before COVID, but I heard they were doing something like a Lucha Underground style thing, and they brought in Dario Cueto, the man, probably the best non-wrestling character, or best non-wrestler character in wrestling in the last decade, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. So yeah, I haven't watched. I think it's like Azteca Underground or something like that. If any of we have our commenters on the YouTube videos. If you guys can explain that to me, with context, I would appreciate it, because I would love to know what they're doing or how it makes sense. But if you've listened to us for a long time, we've had this show on for 17 years or whatever. If you have listened to us, you know that from 2014 to 2017 or 18, Patrick and I lived and died Lucha Underground. We had Cage on this show. We had Son of Havoc. We loved Lucha Underground. It was such a great revolutionary show. I consider it ECW level as far as revolutionizing. It didn't actually change anything to a degree. I think maybe the cinematic content that we see now is I know the Hardys and stuff did that, but I think Lucha Underground pushed that kind of in that direction.
And they did it well.
Yeah, they did it much better than the Hardys did. But we lived and died by that show. It was one of my favorite eras of wrestling. And so the fact that Dario Cueto, who the actor, who I do not know his name off the top of my head, but the actor who plays him, who is a fantastic actor and has classical training, just so fantastic, so wonderful, so interesting. And for him to be back, it makes me want to watch MLW. Now, I don't watch MLW because I don't have BN, because I am a normal person and that service doesn't come on normal, Verizon Fios or whatever. But I might seek this out based on Dario Cueto being there. And I really enjoy MLW as a product, because so MLW normally, when we were in the before times where people could actually go to shows, I live in Long Island City, New York. So I live in Queens. I live right across the river from Manhattan. And there's the Melrose Ballroom is in Long Island City, and it's right in Astoria, Long Island City border. And I've been to about 4 MLW shows there, and literally every time I've been to Ring of Honor shows. Patrick, we went to Ring of Honor for my bachelor party, and I was like, yeah, it's an okay show. I've never been disappointed by an MLW show. Literally, every time we go there, it is a great show. Now, maybe I went to the 4 shows where it's just been fine. I've been to some during WrestleMania weekend. I've been to some just in the middle of the summer or whatever. But, it's always been fun. It's always been a good time. The crowd is raucous. It's a heavy, heavy Latino crowd. And they cater to that audience strongly, so you get a lot of luchador action. It's very cool, and I've always loved MLW, going to MLW shows live. So it's weird that I've never watched the television show, but I guess I should, and I feel like Dario Cueto, El Jefe, whatever you want to call him, definitely pushes me to watch that show.
Yeah, for sure. I was enjoying it. I was watching it week to week. Again, before COVID, and then once that happened, I thought MLW was going to be one of the casualties of the pandemic. But they're back now, and I've just got to jump right back into it. And they've given me the incentive with the return of good old El Jefe. That was some exciting news when I heard that.
Yeah. So yeah, going back to Daniel Bryan, because we were talking about his contract and how you
now I'll make this point. I'll tie this back into AEW. Had Daniel Bryan been the one that came out at Revolution, holy shit, that would have broken the internet.
Yeah.
That's right. Again, not putting down Christian. I'm just saying, like, that was the level of expectation of what we were expecting. So
yeah, and I think I can see Daniel Bryan not wanting to be tied to one place and doing a freelancer type thing where I can see him really wanting to work New Japan. I can see him wanting to do European stuff. I can see him wanting to do lots of stuff with. He's talked very highly of Kenny Omega. So if I'm Daniel Bryan, I'm not immediately going to WWE because you'll know they'll offer him things. I'm like taking offers and like, what do you got for me? So I would love to see where he goes. Has Andrade signed with any place? I know that he's going to be wrestling Kenny Omega for the AAA title, but has Andrade signed any place yet?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm actually just double checking right now. Yeah, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys are kind of like playing the field and they're like seeing what else is out there. And I think that's really interesting. And I think all it does is like make them more valuable. This is going to be the time period where wrestlers make money. We already know in WWE they're throwing bigger bucks than they have been. Even ROH throws big money at guys like Bandito and Roosh and stuff. So like, I think Daniel Bryan can make a killing. I don't think he cares a ton about that. I think he cares about matches and, like who he can compete against. So like if you're a company and you're like, well, hey, you want to work Jay White or Kota Ibushi, or hey, you want to work Kenny Omega and, like Cody Rhodes, or hey, you want to work, Zack Sabre Jr. I think that's the pitch you have to make if you're some of these companies.
Yeah, and again, goes back to the territory days. You used to see stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
It's exciting. And like Andre was like a traveling attraction. We think of him as like a New York specific attraction, but he would travel around to different territories, and he would be used as a bargaining chip for Vince Sr., where he'd be like, all right, if you give me this, and this, and this, I'll let you have Andre
for 2 or 3 shows. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So talks like this and discussions like that are very exciting to me because it just creates all kinds of new possibilities. And it freshens guys up. Like someone like Daniel Bryan, who he's somebody that I felt like, not bad and can still contribute. But in the WWE, I kind of feel like, I've seen his peak. And I've seen about all he can do in the WWE. But when you put him in a New Japan setting where he could possibly have a match with Zack Sabre Jr., I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. I've never seen that.
Yeah. All right. So I think we got through most of our stuff. Patrick, you want to go through our Q&A for this week?
Yes. So let me pull it up.
And remind everybody where they can send their questions for future episodes.
Okay, for our question and answers, you can send the questions to our email address at weekdaywarriors2020@gmail.com. The link will be in the description, or the email address will be in the description. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah, thank you all for the folks that did send their questions.
Yes, absolutely. And should I get started?
Yes, please do.
Okay, this one comes in from Funkmaster Tim. That's the name he gave us.
All right, Funkmaster.
All right, for both Eric and Patrick, what was the first Godzilla movie you ever watched, and what did you think of it at the time you saw it compared to how you feel about it now?
That's an interesting question. What was the first that I saw? You go first, because I have to think about this.
I have vivid memories of mine. I was 4 years old, and I had already seen the original King Kong film, so the next logical step was to watch King Kong versus Godzilla, which my mother got for me. And my brother was, my oldest brother, he was super, super happy to introduce to me. He's like, oh, you're going to love this. And as a King Kong fan at that young of an age, I was like, what? It's just a big T-Rex. King Kong can beat that motherfucker. No, whatever.
That's what you said as a 4-year-old?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That was coming out of my mouth at 4 years old. But then Godzilla came on screen, and it was the closest I'd ever come to experiencing love at first sight. I was like, who is this fire-breathing, tank-stomping, giant dinosaur? This guy's awesome. And I became a little traitor, and I switched sides. And I've been a fan ever since. So I've always had a soft spot for that movie for that reason. It was my introduction to Godzilla. It's not one of my favorites now, but it's one that I look back on fondly because it was my introduction to the franchise.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer with one, and I have no idea if it is the first Godzilla movie I saw, because I have a very good memory, but for some reason I do not know the answer to this question. So I'm going to say the first one that I think I saw, and it's Godzilla Raids Again, or it could I know it has 800 different names.
Gigantus the Fire Monster.
Yes,
is the US
Gigantus
title.
the Fire Monster. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I saw that, and yeah, and I remember there's something I don't know. There's something interesting about Godzilla that he had a very his head was very prehensile. His neck back then was very prehensile. I thought I just so the question was, how do I feel about then, how I feel about now? Back then I just thought it was I don't know, I just thought it was cool, I think, as a kid. I think I've always been interested and engaged by giant monsters and dinosaurs, and I don't know the reason for that. I honestly, the reason is probably not interesting, and it's probably the same reason children are interested in them. It's because they're like dragons or mythical beasts, but they once existed, and Godzilla didn't, so that doesn't make any sense. But maybe that love carried over for that. I've never really sat down and thought about that. Yeah. So I remember at the time I thought it was cool. I thought the idea of two monsters fighting was interesting, because I think up to that point, my exposure through mainstream commercials, advertisements, things was always the monster destroying the city. So seeing a monster fighting another monster was new to me at 6 or 5 or whatever. As far as what I think about it now, I think it's an interesting movie because you can tell they weren't quite sure what to do with Godzilla next. That's the second movie, and the third is King Kong, right, Patrick?
Correct.
Yeah. So, and which Patrick talked about a few episodes ago, that was when they decided Godzilla was viable. But you could see they didn't really know what to do with him after that movie, which is so funny because now, as a franchise, I think Godzilla is more valuable than King Kong is. But back then, they kind of had no idea what to do, and I think it's an interesting turning point where it's almost it was almost the end of Godzilla until, as Patrick talked about with the King Kong Godzilla discussion we had a few shows ago, that it was hey, let's throw this guy in here, and then he got over, so to speak, and became his own thing. So I think it's an interesting turning point in the franchise.
Yeah, it is, and the whole aspect of Godzilla fighting another monster, that was the first time it ever happened, and it kind of brought a pro wrestling kind of aspect to these movies where, especially when I was younger, the whole appeal was, all right, what wacky thing is Godzilla going to fight next? I've got to see this. And I remember when I saw Godzilla vs. Gigan and Godzilla vs. Megalon Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla for the first time, I was like, these monsters just keep getting wackier and wackier. It's great. And that this movie kind of started that whole appeal. It started that whole trend. So, yeah. But it's as far as being an overlooked movie, it's kind of gone the way of Son of Kong, which is another weird parallel to King Kong, where it's the forgotten sequel that just kind of gets overlooked. But it was the one that started the tradition that would impact the identity of the franchise. But again, they still, like you said, they didn't have everything quite figured out yet.
Yeah. So thanks, Funkmaster Tim.
Okay, next question from AJ Envoy version 2. Hi, Eric and Patrick. My question is, what are some of the guys from the Ruthless Aggression era, 2002 to 2008, that you think should have been way bigger deals than they were?
Oh my God, we've got so many. We've got Patrick and I show started in the Ruthless Aggression era, so we have so many people. I'll start off and take this. I think Carlito should have been as big as John Cena. I said that at the time. I don't people can say he had a bad attitude. Randy Orton had a bad attitude. Randy Orton's a giant star for them.
Randy Orton still has a bad attitude.
I know. Yeah, Carlito. He was an international wrestler of color who had a pedigree for greatness, was good without even trying, was like, to me, linked up to Cena in kind of an Austin Rock way. And you and I talked about that when he beat Cena for the U.S. title in like December 04, I believe it was. I'm like, oh, they're going to like do big things with him. But then they started to do the shit that they do now, which is they're like, oh, he's going to be on Piper's Pit, and he gets beat up by Steve Austin and Roddy Piper. And you're like, oh, that's cool, I guess. So I'd say Carlito is a big one for me. I would say Carlito's the one that jumps out at me the most. Patrick, I'll let you take a few, and I'll think while you're talking.
Well, it's one that I don't think he could have been a main eventer, but I think he could have been a really solid hand, like a solid mid-carder, like a honky-tonk man style heel, kind of that goofball character that kind of helps carry the mid-card by getting a ton of heat. Simon Dean. I loved that gimmick so much. I loved the preview packages that they did, all the promos that he did, the whole gimmick. And it was one of those weird, like, part-time job gimmicks that people normally look down on, where it's like, why is a fitness guru wrestling? But here it actually kind of made sense because he was trying to sell his product, the Simon system and everything. So he was using wrestling as a way to kind of, as like a grift to sell his product. Yeah. So there were layers to that. Surprisingly, there were layers to that character that worked. And I thought the performer, Nova, did a really good job playing that role. And I thought he was set to become like, oh, again, he's the new honky tonk man. This is going to be great. And then they just made him a jobber. I didn't get it. It made no sense to me. Like, it's like, dude, this guy can do some good stuff. Come on.
I'll throw one more out there. He's kind of to the latter end of this, but I still think, I think you can still put him in this realm. I think John Morrison should have been a much bigger star. Patrick and I talked to this. If you ever listen to our, I don't know if you can still find them. They may be on Blog Talk Radio, but if you listen to our 2008, 2009 shows, we talk about how Morrison was really getting over in 2009, and the big thing against Morrison was always his mic skills. Like, he had a great look. He was a great in-ring worker. He improved incredibly from 2004 to 2009. And those 5 years, he improved incredibly. And his mic skills were always the problem. And then I remember we heard him on some convention or something, and he was giving an interview, and he just sounded so smooth and funny and cool. And I'm like, where is this guy on WWE? And that was one of those things where the scripted promos ruin it for them. So, I mean, we had our fantasy booking in 2009 where straight edge CM Punk was going to meet up against Rockstar XS John Morrison in the main event, and of course that didn't happen. So what was the 2010 main event? It was I don't even think CM Punk was on that. Oh no, he wrestled Rey Mysterio.
He wrestled Rey. It was Jericho and Edge.
Yeah.
Which I think we had them penciled in as the tag match because they were doing the whole thing where Edge and Jericho were the tag champions and Edge got hurt, so we picked Big Show as his partner. I'm like, okay, Jericho versus Edge and Christian at WrestleMania. Boom.
Yeah, they didn't do that.
No.
So we got that bad match where Edge just shouted spear, and his babyface run ended in 4 months, like it did this time too.
Yeah, pretty much.
So those would be my two. Good question. Yeah.
All right, and I'll throw one more name out there, just because he was a lightning rod of controversy. I feel like they could have done a lot more with him. Muhammad Hassan. That character struck such a nerve with people that, to me, it just, I don't know. I guess you could say he was the first victim of cancel culture, where it offended people and they just decided to pull the plug on it. But I thought, I'm the type of guy that's like, I enjoy it when something hits a raw nerve, and I feel like there's gold to be mined from that whole situation. And I felt like they could have done a lot more with him just because of the fact that he offended people. It was causing all this controversy and getting all this interest. I thought there was a lot of potential there, especially since there was talks that he was going to get the world title shot against Batista in Washington, D.C. Say what?
He was going to win it.
He was going to win. Wow, I hadn't heard that. But, I mean, I can't imagine what that crowd would have been like. And I was there that night. Had the title match been Hassan versus Batista, who's a hometown boy in D.C., by the way, the crowd would have been nuclear for that match.
Yeah. So I first of all, I think it's so interesting because he kind of was canceled, and it's to me it's such bullshit because he didn't do anything wrong. WWE wrote the segment. For those of you who don't know, there were the London bombings, and then like the same week, WWE had a segment where Hassan and like some masked people like attacked Undertaker or something, and like WWE booked the segment, and then they punished the guy that performed the role, and it's like, really, like you wrote this and booked it and did all this stuff, and this guy is the one that has to pay the punishment because he performed the character. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Patrick. I think he was such an interesting character from a sociological standpoint because I remember his videos came out, and the videos were like, he's like, I'm really upset because I'm an American and I was born here, and people insult me and say that I'm a terrorist just because I'm of Arab descent. And then he came in and they're like, you're a terrorist. I'm like, you have proven this man right. And I just remember how hilarious that was. I'm like, this man is like voicing how upset he is that people are based on his heritage are calling him things. And then the crowd does the exact thing he says. And then they just turn his character into a terrorist for no reason. And I'm just like, what the fuck?
Well, I think Hassan mentioned at one point, I think it was him, I'm not sure, maybe my memory's a little fuzzy, but going back to that segment with The Undertaker that caused so much controversy, I think it may have been Hassan, might have been somebody else, I don't know, but they brought up, it's like, look, all the people that attacked Undertaker were wearing ski masks. You're the one that's assuming they're Arab terrorists. Because they could all be white guys underneath those masks. You don't know. So who's the racist? Or who's the real offensive one in this situation?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
All right.
But, okay. Next question comes in from Anthony Shelston. Would you guys ever consider checking out the Australian wrestling scene?
Sure.
He recommends PWA to us. I've never checked it out, but I'm always on the lookout for more wrestling. So, yeah.
Yeah, Anthony, if you email us like ways to watch it and obviously it won't be on our TVs or anything, but if there's like YouTube or streaming clips or whatever, then absolutely we'll check it out.
All right, yeah, sounds good. Next question comes in from Strahinja. Do you think wrestling these days has trouble attracting new fans, and what would you do to fix it? Well, if I knew how to fix it, I would do it myself. Start my own company, and if I really had the golden ticket to like make wrestling the hottest thing in the world again, I would just go ahead and do it myself.
I think they. So I'm not going to pretend that I know how to fix it, like Patrick said, because like I don't know if anyone does. I mean, let me preface this with the fact that I don't know how much there is to fix because wrestling still does really well compared to most things. So like, is it doing gigantic Monday Night Wars numbers? Like, no, but it's doing better numbers than most things. Like AEW was the #1 rated show on cable on Wednesday. So like, that's pretty good. But I understand what you're saying. It can always be bigger, right? How do you do that? So what I try to do is when Patrick and I watch this, we watch it generally as who we are, which are fans Patrick's been watching this for 32 years. I've been watching it for probably like 27, 26 along those lines. I understand that my taste and Patrick's taste, and probably everybody who's listening, is skewed towards our wrestling fandom. So you have to think like you were when you were watching it. And not even you, but just people who don't watch it as much as you do. So like I listen to opinions of people that have no idea about wrestling. I mean, you and I might say like, oh, they don't know shit about this stuff. But those are the people that you might have to hook because they're the ones not watching this stuff, right? So like I'll listen to my mother-in-law. Like she doesn't know anything about pro wrestling, but like I'll get glimpses of what she thinks. And like there's an example of, I think it was Max Caster and Hangman Page. They had a match. And it got too cutesy and it got too like, we're throwing in the boombox, we're moving this up. And like, she's just like, this is fake looking or something along those lines. And I know what she meant. It wasn't crisp enough. And like, they had like they had like an idea of what they wanted to do. Like, oh, you do this, we'll hit him behind the back, blah, 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 blah. But to do that well and to do it so like crisp that it looks like it's a real fight is super difficult. And I think some of that stuff getting too cute can hurt you unless you're like Misawa or Okada or Shawn Michaels or Ric Flair in his prime or whoever, you know, like it's super difficult to do those things. And like I listen to people like that and try to see like, you know, can you simplify it a little bit more? Personally, if you were to ask just Eric Clancy, I think getting rid of invisible cameras helps. I think that's a key immersion breaker for people. So for those of you who are listening new and don't know my critique, the invisible camera is when Randy Orton and John Cena are talking in the back and they're having an argument or whatever, and like there's a camera recording them, but they're acting like they don't know the camera's there, or like it's just like it's catching them somehow, like in a movie, but everybody can see it in the arena, so it doesn't make any sense. There's too many like hurdles you have to jump over in your mind to make that work and suspend disbelief. So I think that hurts them. I think the fact that like it's really sanitized hurts them. Like I think if you look at like MMA and boxing and other types of fighting, like at the end of the day, we watch this stuff because it's like this raw, like it's aggression, right? It's like channeled aggression. It's like when you play, you play a video game and you shoot somebody's head off. I mean, you're not really bloodthirsty, but there's something in the lizard part of your brain that's like, yeah, I want that. So with pro wrestling, it's like you want to see somebody just get fucking mad and believe they're mad and beat the shit out of the other guy. And I think you go back and look at the Attitude Era. Steve Austin, for the most part, you believed he wanted to beat the shit out of you. And I think to a point that's what's missing in a lot of guys in wrestling. I think Eddie Kingston has it. I think a few people have it, but I think it's missing by and large.
To highlight what Eric's talking about, the video game that I'm playing right now, I just got Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate on the Nintendo Switch, and I got it for the express purpose of buying the DLC and playing as John Rambo in a Mortal Kombat game so I could have John Rambo murder ninjas.
Oh, that's
something about that was just instantly appealing to me. It's like it's super violent. It's an action hero that I've loved since I was a kid. And I get to watch him just brutalize these cartoon characters that I grew up watching on video arcades. So something about that was just appealing to me. And I think there is that aspect of wrestling that often gets lost and has been softened over the years.
Yeah, bloodthirst is a real thing. And I think as long as you channel it healthfully, it's okay.
Absolutely. And final question comes from Sasha Gabor. What is your favorite one-night tournament pay-per-view in wrestling history?
I feel like we're both going to say the same answer. So
I have two answers, so you go ahead, and I'll give the other one that I'm thinking of.
Okay, so I'll say what one of yours probably was, which is Deadly Game Survivor Series '98. Right. To me, that is the culmination of a year's worth of storytelling. Specifically the previous 3 months of storytelling. And it's a great example of, I like Dave Meltzer. I think Dave Meltzer does a great service to the industry, but I don't think Dave Meltzer gets certain aspects of wrestling. And this is a great example. You would not call any of these matches, except for maybe the Rock Mankind final, anything close to a 5-star match. Yeah. Yet, there is a coherent story that is told throughout the night that eventually culminates in an amazing reveal and a great setup for the future. The reveal that The Rock has been in on it with Vince and Shane and Patterson and Briscoe the entire time. He was the guy they picked to knock off Austin. It wasn't Mankind. And this whole thing was a way to get the title on him in the same way that in real life Vince McMahon got the title on Shawn Michaels off of Bret Hart at Survivor Series '97. The 1-year anniversary of that made it poignant, and it gives Austin a new top-tier guy to beat the shit out of. To me, it is the culmination of the Attitude Era. I think if you can start the Attitude Era at two places. You can start at WrestleMania 12, or you can start at Survivor Series '97, and you can end it at Survivor Series '98. I think it's a culmination of the great Attitude Era booking.
Yeah, and the best thing that tournament did, and everything you said was absolutely spot on, but the best thing that tournament did is that it finally gave Vince that corporate champion that he was looking for. Because guys like Undertaker, Kane, and Foley don't fit the bill of like the perfect corporate champion, but you put The Rock in that spot, and magic was made. Yeah,
well, you look over the course of the summer and the spring before that, and I remember it the whole time. I remember watching it, and I'm like, dude, Love, that's not really a guy for Vince. And like Undertaker and Kane, like those it doesn't seem like Vince, like he just wants it off Austin, but it doesn't seem like he wants to get it on anyone in particular. I remember thinking that when I was watching it. And then like by the time you get The Rock and you're like, oh my God, it's this handsome movie star, like smooth talking Muhammad Ali guy. Of course he wants this guy. Like it just was the final piece in the Vince McMahon versus Steve Austin puzzle.
Yeah, going back to what you said, it's one of my favorite Raw memories from '98, and I don't know why. It's just a line that always stuck with me, and it just defined Vince as a character. Austin was defending the title against Goldust, who I believe was still doing the artist formerly known as Goldust at this point.
Yep, it was right before he went to Born Again.
Right. And Vince was like, people are probably asking me what kind of a world champion would Goldust make, but I would counter by saying anybody would be better than Stone Cold Steve Austin. And it's like, oh God, he's that desperate at this point. He just wants the belt off of the rattlesnake, and stuff like that kind of stayed with me.
Yeah. So what's yours?
That was the final question.
Mine.
But you had yours. Mine. Yes. The other one, and yes, Deadly Games would be my number one pick, but if I had like a 1A or a number 2, it would be King of the Ring 93. And I've heard Eric Bischoff talk about this a lot on his podcast about how one-night tournaments are very hard to do and don't usually work because, you're seeing the same people come out match after match, and there's a law of diminishing returns. Every time you see that person, it's less interesting because you already saw them, and various other aspects like that. Guys are working long, they get tired, and it's hard to keep all of the matches interesting because of that. So it's a very hard format to do. I think one of the best executions of that format was King of the Ring 93, where you watch Brett go out there and have different matches with Razor Ramon, Mr. Perfect, and Bam Bam Bigelow.
3 totally different wrestlers.
Yes, absolutely. And the finals in particular was a very exciting match with one of my favorite, like, kind of false finishes that was ever done, where it looked like Bam Bam had won, and then it's like, oh, no, we're reversing the decision. It's like, no, we're restarting the match. So there was some, like, some gaga there that kind of threw some color on it. And you had other aspects going on as well. You had the battle of the 2 undefeated guys, Tatanka and Lex Luger, and it's like, ooh, who's going to win this one? It's 2 undefeated guys. Yeah, it ended in a draw, and then it's like, oh, well, what happens now? Well, Bam Bam gets a bye to the finals. That's not fair. That's bullshit. Again, me watching as a kid, this is what I yelled at the television screen.
You were such a foul-mouthed child, you know that?
I know. I was a little terror. That must be the New York aspect of my family just kind of rubbing off on me. But I thought as far as like executing the format of making the matches exciting and telling a story throughout the night, I thought King of the Ring 93 did it really, really well. About as well as anybody possibly could.
And I think Brett used like a different finish for each of those matches.
Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's like. I mean, I feel like people wouldn't be able to do that today in a 3-match tournament.
No, I don't think they would book it that way.
Yeah. They would be like, we got to get this over. We got to get the sharpshooter over.
And I think that speaks to, especially in WWE, where guys just have very little control over what goes on, and they're just kind of at the mercy of what Vince wants and what the agent's right for them.
Yeah. These were great questions. These were really fun, great questions. So if you guys want to keep sending them, to in the next show or another show, we will compile them and do them again. What's that email address again, Patrick?
That email address is weekdaywarriors2020@gmail.com.
And we'll have it in the description so you can grab it there. But want to thank everybody for listening. As always, like, subscribe, share, yada, 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 all the social media stuff. It's stupid, but it helps us. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next week. But right now, we are
signing off.